I always knew there was a difference between being a mother and being a stepmother, but I didn't expect the line to be so sharp, so permanent, and so cutting. When I married David, I thought love was enough to soften the edges, enough to bridge the cracks his daughter carried in her heart. I knew she had lost her mother young, and I walked into that reality with both hands open, willing to love her in whatever way she could accept. But from the beginning, she kept me at arm's length, like I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I wasn't naive. I didn't expect her to call me mom, but I hoped, just hoped, that with time she'd at least see me as someone who was trying, someone who wanted the best for her. Instead, every gesture I made seemed to vanish into a void, unacknowledged, unnoticed, and at times, actively resented. The small things were what cut me the deepest. Holidays where I would set the table, cook for hours, and then watch her push food around her plate in silence, her attention fixed only on her father. Family pictures where she would lean into him but never once glance in my direction, as if I were simply a stranger who had wandered into the frame. Even birthdays became battlegrounds of unspoken tension, where I'd planned something thoughtful, only to see her roll her eyes, thank her dad, and never so much as nod toward me. I told myself it was grief, it was teenage angst, it was something that would pass. But it didn't pass. It calcified into something colder, harder, something that no amount of kindness could melt. Still, I stayed patient. I reminded myself that being a stepmother meant walking a road where love was never guaranteed. I told myself that maybe my role wasn't to be loved, but simply to support, to provide, to make life easier where I could. And so I gave. I gave time. I gave effort. I gave money. Every milestone she had, college tuition help, her first apartment down payment, and then, eventually, her wedding. I extended myself without hesitation. I thought maybe money wasn't love, but it was a language she understood, a way of showing her that even if she didn't want me emotionally, I was still invested in her happiness. And in truth, a part of me hoped that maybe one day she'd look back and realize I had been there all along, even if she never wanted to see me. When the engagement was announced, I was among the last to know. She told her father first, of course, then his side of the family, and even posted it on social media before anyone thought to call me. I found out because a cousin sent me a screenshot, asking if I was excited. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at my phone, pretending I wasn't hurt. I told myself it didn't matter, that what mattered was showing up anyway, being the bigger person, doing what was right even if it wasn't recognized. When David and I sat down with her and her fiancé to talk about the wedding, I offered to contribute. In fact, I went further. I told them I'd cover the bulk of the expenses. Don't worry about the venue or the caterer, I said, smiling even as her eyes slid past me to her dad. I'll handle it. She gave a small nod, barely audible thanks, and that was the extent of it. No hug, no warmth, just acknowledgement that I was, yet again, useful. For months, I poured money into deposits, invoices, and vendor agreements. I wrote checks for florists who showed me arrangements I'd never get credit for, answered emails from planners who always prefaced with "the bride said," as if my involvement was peripheral. The only thing they cared about was that my name was on the contracts, my card on file. And I didn't mind, not at first. I told myself this was for her happiness, for David's peace, and maybe, just maybe, for a sliver of acceptance I'd been chasing for over a decade. But each time I watched her brush past me, each time she posted online about her perfect dad making her dreams come true, I felt the sting of invisibility grow sharper. The truth, the raw truth I never admitted out loud, was that I was tired. Tired of being erased. Tired of giving and never being seen. Tired of being in a home where I was the ghost in the corner, tolerated but never embraced. I had tried, harder than most would have, to love a child who wanted no part of me. I cooked, I cleaned, I supported, and in return I was told, in 1,000 subtle ways, that I was an outsider. And yet, even with all that weight pressing on me, I still thought maybe the wedding could be a turning point. Maybe gratitude could grow where love had refused to take root. Maybe, if she saw what I'd done for her, she'd soften. But I should have known better. There's something about weddings that magnifies people's true selves. Some brides glow with gratitude and joy, while others wield the day like a weapon. In the months leading up to hers, I began to see which one she was. Decisions were made without me, then handed to me as bills to be paid. Vendors were instructed to bypass me entirely, to call only her or her father. At fittings, I was treated like furniture, sitting quietly while her aunts and cousins gushed over her, not once turning to include me in their circle of laughter. I kept my head high, my smile fixed, and my credit card open. But inside, the resentment simmered, deep and unacknowledged, until it was too heavy to ignore. And then came the moment that would change everything. 6 hours before the wedding, my phone rang. It was her voice clipped, her words sharp. "I don't need you there," she said flatly. "Know your place." I remember gripping the phone, my heart racing, not with sadness this time, but with a strange, chilling clarity. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask her to reconsider. I simply said, "All right," and hung up. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I knew exactly where my place was, and it wasn't standing silently at the edge of her spotlight anymore. When I say I was invisible to her, I don't mean it lightly. I mean it in the truest sense of the word, like I wasn't there, like the years I spent in that house, sharing space, cooking meals, listening to her father defend her every whim, had been erased with a single breath. The wedding planning only made it clearer. I wasn't just excluded from the decisions. I was deliberately cut out of the narrative. Guest lists were passed around without my input, names scribbled and circled in handwriting I didn't recognize. I caught glimpses of them once or twice on the dining room table, lists carefully crafted, categorized into family, friends, colleagues. My name wasn't there. Not in family, not in in-laws, not in anything. It was as though I had ceased to exist in her world, even though it was my wallet making much of it possible. I remember one night vividly, a late evening when David and I sat together in the living room. He had the list in his hand, and I asked him casually, "Did she put me down as a guest?" He hesitated for half a second, just long enough for me to notice. Then he said, "Of course. You're her stepmom. Why wouldn't she?" But I saw the flicker in his eyes, the way he avoided looking directly at me. He knew. He knew she hadn't even bothered to write my name. And he was ashamed, though not ashamed enough to confront her about it. That was the story of our marriage when it came to his daughter. He always chose silence over honesty, appeasement over fairness. And I bore it quietly, swallowing the bitterness until it left a permanent taste on my tongue. As the weeks went by, vendors started calling. Some had questions about details, about payment timelines, about last-minute changes. Yet almost every call began with the same refrain: "The bride said," or "the bride wants." And then, inevitably, she asked me to confirm with her dad. Not me. Never me. It became comical, in a cruel sort of way, how much effort she put into ensuring I was sidelined. I once asked the florist, just to test the waters, "And what about my opinion on the arrangements?" There was a pause, awkward and telling, before she said, "Well," she mentioned she preferred to keep the decisions between her and her father. I hung up after that call with my chest aching, not because I hadn't expected it, but because even strangers could sense the hostility I lived with daily. What I never said aloud, not even to myself at first, was how tired I had grown of fighting for scraps of acknowledgement. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about the years leading up to it, the countless dinners where she pretended not to hear me, the vacations where she took photos with everyone but me, the small but deliberate ways she carved me out of her world. And yet, there I was, paying for a dream I wasn't invited to share in. I had thought money could bridge the gap, that generosity could replace affection, but instead it only confirmed what she already believed. That I was there to serve, to fund, to exist quietly in the background without complaint. The day before the wedding, I helped finalize a few invoices. The venue, the caterer, the DJ, all of it signed under my name, with my card attached. I should have felt proud. It was a big contribution, more than many stepmothers would even consider giving. Instead, I felt hollow. I looked at the paperwork spread out on my desk, the elegant fonts and embossed letterheads, and realized none of it mattered to her. None of it would ever matter. To her, I was a checkbook. To David, I was a buffer between him and the reality of how much his daughter excluded me. And to myself, I was starting to become nothing more than a woman who had poured too much into a relationship that never wanted her. The breaking point came, not with an explosion, but with a single phone call. 6 hours before the wedding, my phone lit up with her name. For a split second, I thought maybe she wanted to thank me. Maybe she had realized something at the last minute. Foolish hope still lived in me, despite everything. But when I answered, her tone was sharp, almost rehearsed. "I don't need you there," she said, her voice cool and final. "Know your place." I remember the way my stomach dropped, how the silence between her words felt heavier than the words themselves. Know your place. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a declaration that in her story, I had no role, no significance, no humanity beyond being an outsider. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask her to reconsider. I simply said, "All right," and hung up. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The pain I expected didn't come. Instead, clarity did. I thought about all the years of effort, the sacrifices, the countless ways I had tried to earn even a fraction of her respect, and I realized it had all been wasted. She didn't want me there. She never had. And so, for the first time, I accepted it. I finally understood what my place truly was, and it wasn't standing quietly in the background of her perfect day. When I hung up that phone, the silence in the house was so thick I could almost hear my own heartbeat. I set the phone down on the counter, staring at it for a long moment, as though expecting it to ring again, expecting her to call back and laugh it off, to say she hadn't meant it that way. But it didn't ring. There was no apology waiting on the other side of that call. No explanation, no softening of the blow. Only finality. 6 hours before her wedding, she had told me, in no uncertain terms, that I was not wanted. And rather than crumble, something steadied inside me. It was not rage, not even sorrow. It was a chilling calmness, the kind that comes when you finally stop chasing what was never meant to be. I walked into my study and pulled out the neat folder I had kept for months, filled with invoices, contracts, and receipts. My name was on every single one. The florist, the caterer, the DJ, the venue. It was all under me. My handwriting signed on dotted lines, my card number embossed on digital statements. For the first time, I saw those papers not as evidence of my generosity, but as proof of my control. All these months, she had treated me as irrelevant. And yet, in the most practical sense, none of this wedding could even exist without me. I sat down at the desk, opened the first file, and stared at the florist's number. My hand hovered for a moment, and then I dialed. "Hello, this is Bloom and Vine." A cheerful voice answered. "This is regarding the Johnson wedding scheduled for this evening," I said evenly. "I need to cancel the order." There was a pause, then a flurry of concern. "Cancel? But the delivery truck is already on the way, ma'am." "Are you sure? We've prepared the entire arrangement. Roses, lilies, centerpieces. It's all ready." "Yes, I'm sure," I replied, my tone steady. "Please cancel, and bill me whatever you need for the inconvenience." The florist tried again, her voice tinged with confusion, but I cut her off gently. "It won't be needed anymore." And then I hung up. I sat there for a moment, listening to the silence that followed, and I felt no regret, no second-guessing. Only clarity. Next was the caterer. This one felt heavier, because I knew the magnitude of what I was undoing. Food for 200 guests, prepped and waiting. But when the manager picked up and asked how they could help, I spoke just as plainly as before. "Cancel tonight's event. It will not be moving forward." The manager sputtered, asked for reasons, begged me to reconsider, but I remained calm, repeating only that it would not be necessary. When I hung up, I leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly, almost feeling a release in my chest. Each call wasn't just a cancellation. It was a reclaiming of myself. The venue was trickier. The contract was ironclad, and I knew there would be penalties. But as I spoke to the coordinator, explaining that I was pulling the booking, I felt no fear of the consequences. Let them keep the deposit. Let them talk about me later. Money wasn't the issue. Respect was. And when the coordinator said, alarmed, "But ma'am, the wedding party is scheduled to arrive in just a few hours," I only said, "Then they'll find the doors closed." I hung up, my pulse steady, almost serene. One by one, I made the calls. The DJ, the rentals, even the cake. Each vendor sounded shocked. Some tried to protest. Others sounded almost relieved to have clarity. And when it was all done, I closed the folder, pushed it aside, and sat quietly in the stillness of my home. It was done. The wedding was gone, dismantled piece by piece before it could ever unfold. I thought I would feel guilt. I thought maybe tears would come, or that the weight of what I had done would crash down on me. But instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time since I had married David, I wasn't sitting silently, waiting to be acknowledged. I wasn't swallowing disrespect in the hope that it might one day be repaid. I had acted. I had drawn a line that could not be crossed. And though the world might call it vindictive, to me, it was nothing more than balance being restored. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch, watching the sunlight stretch across the lawn. Birds chirped overhead. Neighbors mowed their lawns. The world went on as though nothing monumental had shifted. Yet inside me, everything had. My phone buzzed on the counter, once, twice, then endlessly. Calls, texts, voicemails. I ignored them all. I didn't need to hear the chaos on the other side to know what was happening. Guests would be arriving soon, dressed in their finest, only to find an empty hall. The bride would be shrieking, the groom confused, the family scrambling. And somewhere in that storm, David would be realizing exactly what his silence had cost him. As I sat there, sipping slowly, my sister came by, drawn by curiosity after hearing my voice earlier in the day. I told her, without flinching, what I had done. She stared at me, wide-eyed, then burst into laughter that rang across the yard. "You really did it?" she asked. "You actually canceled everything?" "Yes," I said simply. "She told me to know my place. So I did." My sister shook her head, half in disbelief, half in admiration. "I warned you about her. I told you she would never see you, never respect you. But you finally stopped letting them walk over you." She raised her glass when I poured her one, clinking it against mine. "To peace," she said. And for the first time in years, I meant it when I answered, "To peace." By the time the first voicemail came through, I was already sitting in the backyard, a blanket draped across my lap, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. My glass of wine had barely been touched, not because I didn't want it, but because I was savoring the calm. The world outside my fence had no idea that a storm was brewing just a few miles away, in a hall filled with people expecting celebration and finding only silence. My phone buzzed again, then again, until finally, curiosity made me press play. The sound of chaos spilled through the speaker. Her voice first, high-pitched and cracking. "Where are the flowers? Where's the food? What do you mean nothing is here?" Someone in the background muttered about refunds. Someone else demanded answers, and then the message cut out in static. I set the phone back down without responding, my chest steady, almost eerily still. The second message was worse. It was David this time, his voice thick with panic. "What did you do? They're saying everything's been canceled. The guests are here, the band doesn't have their setup, the food hasn't arrived. People are standing around asking what's happening. Did you cancel this? Tell me you didn't do this, please." I didn't answer. I let his desperation hang in the air, a sound I had never heard from him before. He had begged me for many things in our marriage: patience, understanding, forgiveness, but never accountability. And now, it seemed, the moment had finally arrived when he had no choice but to face the weight of his choices and of mine. I could picture the scene in my mind as clearly as if I were standing in the hall. Guests arriving in elegant clothes, expecting music and laughter, only to be greeted by empty tables, bare walls, and vendors' trucks turning away at the gate. I could imagine the whispers starting like cracks in a dam, spreading quickly from group to group. What happened? Where's the food? Why isn't the bride ready? The embarrassment must have been suffocating. The perfect image she had curated shattered in an instant. And the irony was almost poetic. After years of trying to erase me, the absence she demanded had swallowed her entire day whole. By the third call, her voice was hoarse from screaming. "You're evil," she shrieked into my voicemail. "You ruined everything. Do you know what you've done to me? Everyone is laughing at me. My friends, my fiancé's family, they're all looking at me like I'm a fool. You've destroyed me." Her sobs came hard and fast, the kind of cries that left her breathless. But even through her tears, there was no reflection, no acknowledgement of how she had treated me. Only blame. Only rage. I listened until the voicemail ended, then quietly deleted it, not because it hurt, but because it didn't matter anymore. When the fourth call came, I finally picked up, not out of guilt, but out of curiosity. It was David again, his tone lower now, angrier. "How could you?" he demanded before I could even say hello. "Do you have any idea what you've done to her? To me? This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. And you ruined it. Everyone is asking questions, and I can't even look at them. They think I married a monster." I stayed quiet for a long moment before answering. "David," I said evenly, "for 10 years, I've sat quietly while she erased me. I've given her money, time, effort, everything, and she has never once shown me respect. Today she told me to know my place. So I did. My place is not standing in a hall pretending I matter to people who don't want me there. My place is here, in my own home, finally at peace." He sputtered, trying to find words, but none came. The silence stretched so long that I thought he might hang up. Finally, he muttered, "This isn't peace. This is destruction." "No," I corrected him softly. "This is clarity." And then I hung up. Hours passed. The calls didn't stop. Friends, relatives, numbers I didn't recognize, all trying to drag me into the wreckage of the evening. But I didn't answer. I knew what they would say, the names they would hurl, the condemnations they would spit. Wicked, cruel, heartless, maybe even unforgivable. But none of them had lived my life. None of them had sat at the dinner tables where I was ignored. None of them had written checks with shaking hands hoping for a single ounce of gratitude that never came. To them, it looked like sabotage. To me, it looked like liberation. Meanwhile, I imagined the wedding unraveling in real time. Guests trickling out, embarrassed, whispering behind hands as they left the empty hall. The groom's family, red-faced, glaring at the bride, at David, at anyone they could blame for the debacle. The bride herself, makeup smeared, dress wrinkled, screaming until her throat gave out. Maybe someone tried to comfort her, maybe someone tried to fix it, but it was already too late. The day was gone, and there was no salvaging it because the foundation it had been built on, disrespect, dismissal, erasure, had been rotten all along. That night, when the house was finally dark and the phone had quieted down, I stood by the window and looked out at the quiet street. Somewhere out there, the gossip was spreading like wildfire. People were already piecing the story together, spinning it in ways that would paint me as the villain. And maybe I was, in their eyes. Maybe I would always be the stepmother who ruined the wedding. But as I stood there, breathing in the cool night air, I realized something important. Villains often have more peace than martyrs. And after 10 years of being martyred on the altar of her hostility, I was ready to wear the title proudly if it meant freedom. David didn't come home until long after midnight. I heard his car before I saw him, the crunch of tires on gravel and the slam of the driver's door reverberating through the stillness of the house. I was still awake, sitting at the dining room table with nothing but a small lamp on, the wine glass still in front of me though untouched for hours. When the front door opened, I didn't rise to meet him. I stayed where I was, waiting for him to walk in with all the fury and disappointment I knew he'd been bottling since the wedding fell apart. And when he finally appeared in the doorway, the look on his face confirmed it. Red eyes, jaw clenched, hands trembling as though holding back a tide of anger he could no longer contain. "How could you do this?" he spat, his voice shaking in the way only true rage makes it shake. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you even understand the humiliation she went through tonight?" The entire hall was filled with people, our family, her friends, the groom's parents, and there was nothing. Nothing. "You destroyed her day, her reputation, her future." His words cracked like a whip, but I didn't flinch. I had braced myself for this moment the second I hung up on him earlier. I looked at him calmly, folding my hands on the table, and let his accusations wash over me without reaction. Because for once, I wasn't going to shrink under the weight of his anger. "Sit down, David," I said quietly, my voice calm in stark contrast to his fury. "We need to talk." He slammed his hand against the table, rattling the glass. "Don't tell me to sit down. You've ruined everything. You've embarrassed me in front of everyone I know. They all kept asking where you were, why the bride's stepmother would do something so unthinkable. Do you know what I had to say? Do you know how it felt standing there with no answers? His chest heaved, his breath shallow and rapid, and for a moment I saw a flash of desperation in his eyes, not just anger but fear. Fear of the truth he had avoided for far too long. You had no answers because you've never had the courage to face the truth, I said steadily. Not about her, not about me, not about us. You let your daughter treat me like a stranger in my own home for over 10 years. You stood by while she erased me from every part of her life. You expected me to swallow disrespect again and again while you told yourself it was easier to keep the peace. Tonight, I stopped swallowing it. Tonight, I finally showed you and her that I'm not invisible. You want to call me cruel? Fine. But I am not the villain here. I am the woman who has had enough. His mouth opened and closed like he wanted to argue, but no words came. I watched the flicker of recognition cross his face, the way he couldn't deny what I said even if he wanted to. She's your daughter, he finally managed, voice breaking with exhaustion. She's all I have left of her mother. Do you know how hard it's been, raising her alone? And then you came along, and I thought. He stopped himself, choking on the rest of the sentence. But I knew what he wanted to say. He thought I would take the burden quietly, carry the weight, absorb the resentment, and never push back. I know exactly how hard it's been, I interrupted sharply. Because I lived it too. I lived the cold shoulders, the silent dinners, the way she would pretend I didn't exist. I cooked meals she refused to eat. I gave gifts she never acknowledged. I helped pay for milestones she credited only to you. And I stayed. I stayed because I loved you, because I thought maybe my presence could make a difference. But tonight made it clear it never mattered. Not to her. And apparently, not enough to you either. He sank into the chair across from me, finally defeated by his own exhaustion. His shoulders slumped, his hands covering his face. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator. When he finally lowered his hands, his voice was softer, cracked with something like regret. You've destroyed any chance of her forgiving you. She'll never speak to you again. She'll never forgive me either, for letting you. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. David, she never spoke to me before. She never forgave me for marrying you, for existing in her world. So what, exactly, have I lost tonight? Nothing. But I gained something you'll never understand because you've never demanded it for yourself. I gained peace. I drew a boundary. I finally stopped pretending that if I gave enough, she'd give me back something in return. My voice wavered slightly, not from doubt, but from the release of years of pent-up frustration, finally finding its way into words. He shook his head, tears welling in his eyes, and whispered, "You've made me choose." No, I corrected him firmly. She made you choose. Years ago, when she decided I would never be more than a shadow in her life. And you went along with it. You chose her silence over my dignity. Tonight, I simply reminded you what that choice looks like when I stop paying the price for it. We sat there, locked in a silence that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't feel small under his disappointment. I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the only person in the room willing to tell the truth. And though I knew the fallout would be ugly, though I knew my name would be dragged through every family gathering and whispered about in every corner of their social circle, I also knew I could live with it. Because I wasn't the villain in this story. I was simply the woman who had finally stepped out of the shadows. The days that followed were loud, even though my house was quiet. The phone never seemed to stop ringing. Relatives, friends, even acquaintances who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly found it necessary to call. Some wanted to scold me, their voices dripping with moral outrage. Others wanted to pry, eager for details to feed the wildfire of gossip already spreading through the family. I didn't answer most of them. When I did, my responses were short, deliberate, and unshaken. It was my money. It was my decision. I did what I needed to do. Some sputtered, some cursed, and a few fell into stunned silence. But I didn't elaborate. I didn't defend myself beyond that. For once, I didn't feel the need to justify my existence. David was colder with me in those first few days, but it wasn't the icy silence of estrangement. It was the silence of a man drowning in his own conflict. He didn't shout anymore. He didn't demand explanations. He just walked around the house like a ghost, his movements heavy, his sighs constant. When I passed him in the hallway, his eyes avoided mine. When I cooked dinner, he barely touched his plate. At night, he lay stiff in bed, his back turned toward me. And yet, despite his distance, I wasn't shaken. For years, I had been the one shrinking in silence while he ignored the reality of how his daughter treated me. Now the silence was his to carry, and I had no intention of rescuing him from it. Meanwhile, the stepdaughter did what she had always done. She took the story public. Within hours of the ruined wedding, her social media was filled with posts dripping in venom. Imagine a stepmother so wicked she destroys her stepdaughter's wedding day, one post read. Another, even more dramatic. Some people are so jealous they'll stop at nothing to ruin your happiness. Friends of hers chimed in with sympathy, strangers joined in with outrage, and soon enough, the narrative spread like wildfire. I was the cruel stepmother, the villain who had torched a young woman's big day out of spite. But what she didn't expect was that not everyone believed her version. Because while she was painting me as the monster, receipts started to surface, screenshots of vendor contracts under my name, invoices with my card details, confirmations tied directly to me. When people saw the truth, that I had paid for nearly everything, her story began to unravel. Some still condemned me, insisting money didn't give me the right to ruin her day. Others, though, started asking harder questions. If your stepmother paid for everything, why didn't you treat her better? Why didn't you show gratitude? Why did you cut her out? And while she tried to fight back with half-truths and emotional pleas, the cracks were showing. I stayed silent through it all. I didn't post, didn't argue, didn't explain. I didn't need to. Silence, I had learned, was often the loudest statement a person could make. There was one unexpected moment that nearly cracked me, though. A week after the disaster, a small card appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside, written in careful script, were the words, "I don't agree with what you did, but I understand why you did it." That was all. No name, no signature. I stood in the kitchen, staring at those words, and for the first time since the wedding, tears welled in my eyes. Because whoever had written it, whether friend, relative, or stranger, they had seen me, not as the villain, not as the scapegoat, but as a woman who had reached her breaking point after years of being ignored. That card, more than anything, reminded me that I wasn't insane, that I wasn't alone in recognizing the truth. David eventually broke his silence too, though not in the way I expected. One evening, as we sat in the living room, he finally said, "She's not going to forgive me. Not for marrying you, not for letting you do this, not for anything. And maybe I can live with that. But I don't know if I can live with what you did." His words were heavy, deliberate, and they hung in the air between us. I met his eyes, my own steady, and replied, "Then you'll have to decide if you want to live with me at all. Because I'm done living without dignity." His face fell, and though he didn't respond, I knew he understood that the choice was now his, not mine. For once, I wasn't the one waiting to be chosen. In the weeks that followed, the noise slowly faded. The phone rang less. The online posts dwindled. The whispers grew quieter. People moved on, as they always do, finding new scandals, new dramas, new stories to chew on. But inside me, the shift remained. I no longer measured my worth by her approval, no longer bent myself into shapes trying to fit into a role she never intended to let me play. I had stepped out of the shadows she forced me into, and though the way I did it was brutal, it was also undeniable. She could erase me from photos, from holidays, from acknowledgments, but she couldn't erase the truth of what I had done. And as for peace, I found it not in reconciliation but in release. I stopped caring whether she ever forgave me. I stopped waiting for David to defend me. I stopped chasing the love that was never going to come. My peace didn't come from mending. It came from accepting. Accepting that some relationships are not meant to heal, that some people will never see you no matter how much you give, and that sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to walk away from the role they've trapped you in. So yes, they call me wicked. They call me cruel. They call me a stepmother straight out of a nightmare. But in the quiet of my own home, with no more weight on my shoulders and no more desperate attempts to belong, I finally called myself something else, free. Some people will say I was wrong. Others will say I was justified. But I want to hear from you. After years of being erased, would you have done the same? Or do you think I went too far? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story kept you hooked, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you soon.